Hey, this is Mohal Joshi from Los Angeles, California. I follow Indian foreign policy and defense with a special focus on Asia. You can follow me on Twitter at Mohal Joshi.
Hey, this is Kishor from Bengaluru in India. I am an international relations expert specializing in global security, conflict resolution, and international negotiation. My focus areas include peace building and digital diplomacy. You can find me on Twitter at Veggie Diplomat. Hello and welcome to episode 26 of India Rising Strategic Affairs Conversations with Mohal and Kishor, a show in which we analyze the happenings from around the world and their impact on India. Before we begin with today's episode, we just hope that you and your loved ones are safe at home and are healthy during these troubled times. Remember to stay home and stay safe. In today's episode, we talk about the recent skirmishes witnessed at multiple locations across the line of actual control, also called the LAC, between India and China in the past 3 weeks. Skirmishes along the LAC are nothing new, but the synchronized efforts at multiple locations across various sectors have made all of us take note of the evolving situation. If you are listening to us through a podcast, we recommend that you listen to this episode on YouTube, as we have added a lot of maps and images which augment the analysis that we are going to make. The YouTube link can be found in the description. Before we look at the skirmishes, where and how they happened, there is an important aspect that we think is needed to set things straight, and that is about the differing perceptions of the LAC. The border issue is something that we had covered in episode 22 during the Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to Chennai for an informal summit with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. One thing to remember is that since the 1967 Nathula border conflict, there has not been any armed skirmishes across the LAC for over 52 years. The last bullets fired were in Arunachal Pradesh in 1975, when some Indian soldiers reportedly got lost in the fog and were shot at by Chinese troops. There are transgressions by China along the line of actual control where they keep needling India constantly. India has a dispute with Pakistan over Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir, but we do have a delineated LOC, line of control, up to point NJ9842. But for the LAC keeping aside the territorial claims made by both sides, there is no delineated border at all. So while troops of one side might genuinely think that they are patrolling on their own territory, the opposite side might think that they are encroaching on their territory. Mohal?
Yes, Kishore. So let's take a fictitious example to dwell into more detail on this topic. So let's take a fictional situation where there might be a dispute between two states of India. Let's say Gujarat and Delhi, for example. So as you can see the image on the screen, let's say both make a claim to the state of Rajasthan to be part of their own territory. Now, neither side has full control of Rajasthan, which they claim to be theirs. So as you can see on the map, let's say both have fought a war in theory over this area. And when hostilities ended, they were around the city of Ajmer, approximately in central Rajasthan. But there is no defined boundary which separates them both. Now, one might think that both sides would have troops actually eyeball to eyeball at Ajmer, where a theoretical LAC passes through. However, they are in reality positioned a bit behind that. Now, both Gujarat and Delhi can decide where the actual LAC in this case falls at. Now, Gujarat, as shown in the map, would claim that the LAC should be all the way up to Jaipur, which is like a bit more towards Delhi versus Gujarat, making the area claimed by Gujarat larger than what Delhi would ideally want. Now, conversely, on the other hand, Delhi would make the claim as per its own perception that it lies at Udaipur, and all the areas north of it falls under Delhi's control, where it has the right to patrol. So what this would make is that this would what in effect it creates a gray zone where the area between, let's say, Jaipur, which is the Gujarat claim line, and Udaipur, which is the Delhi claim line, is claimed by both sides to be theirs. Hence, both armies see it fit to patrol up to their own claim lines and where some of these disputes or standoffs would occur. Kishore?
Yeah, that's a great example for our listeners to understand. So, in effect, we have the Gujarat claim line and the Delhi claim line, and very similarly, we have the India claim line and the China claim line. Now, the above example involved areas stretching over hundreds of kilometers. But if you scale it down greatly to the situation at LAC between India and China, this is what is happening on the ground. Both armies are keen to patrol to their respective claim lines, and when they come into contact with each other is when the disputes arise as to who is encroaching on whose land. In the past, both armies used to patrol to their own respective claim lines and then turn back to their bases without encountering any opposition. However, in recent years, since India has stepped up patrolling, they run into Chinese patrols very often, which causes these standoffs. This is a significant point which has to be kept in mind when one hears of more incursions or standoffs occurring over the past few years versus earlier. When you have an undefined or non-delineated border with a differing perception of where the actual border should lie, it creates many of these issues of reported encroachments on both sides. This issue of a delineated LOC versus a non-delineated LAC often gets overlooked in the discussion of the boundary dispute. This is where the mandate of the previously mentioned special representatives comes into the picture. Define, delineate, and demarcate. While there have been 22 rounds of these talks, the 22nd round was held in Delhi in December 2019. We have not resolved the boundary dispute. The frustrating part on India's side is that while we have put forth our claims, the Chinese, for some apparent reason, have never put forth their claims. When the process began, initially maps were exchanged in the middle sector where the differences were the least. However, when the exercise was done in the western sector, once China saw the Indian claims and most likely realized that the divergences in positions claims were so large with their perceptions, not only they refused to share their claims, but also the process fell through around 2002. China has since rejected this exercise, viewing it as adding another complication to the ongoing boundary negotiations. India's argument is rather than agree on one LAC, the exercise could help both sides understand the claims of the other, paving the way to regulate activities in contested areas until a final settlement of the boundary dispute. Once both sides put forth their claims, some resolution can be reached via a so-called grand bargain or negotiations. But without any claims from one side, it becomes very hard to reach a settlement, if not impossible. On January 1st, 2020, China said that it, along with India, was actively exploring the contents of an early harvest settlement of the bilateral boundary dispute. Beijing's statement came a day after Hindustan Times reported that India had linked China's early harvest proposal for settling the Sikkim land boundary to the simultaneous demarcation of the middle sector in Uttarakhand as a stepping stone to the phased resolution of the boundary dispute. So, if you see the entire boundary demarcation dispute runs through the entire length of the India-China border, starting from Ladakh in the north all the way up to Arunachal Pradesh in the east. So there are multiple regions where such negotiations will have to take place, and a fruitful settlement will have to be arrived at. But because China is not playing game, India's claims will fall on deaf ears. Mohal?
Yeah, so good explanation on the historical perspective. So now coming to the current standoff, the current standoff started earlier this month, it's like May 2020, in multiple places along the LAC in both the western sector, which is Ladakh, and also in the eastern sector in northern Sikkim. So on May 9th in Nakula, a mountain pass between northern Sikkim and Tibet, there was a confrontation between Indian and Chinese troops. According to one report, a young Indian lieutenant punched a Chinese major, which led to the major being left with a bloody nose. Now, in the process of this confrontation, some soldiers from both sides were injured. The situation was ultimately brought under control after senior officers of both sides intervened. After.
Yeah, Mohal, I actually read one more article yesterday
Mhm,
while researching for this. And
mhm.
that article also mentioned that an Indian officer was also injured and he had to be airlifted uh, back to safety. Now, another point with
Mhm.
regards to this is happening in a new place altogether, in a place called Nakula. And remember, it's not the Nathula, the border outpost that we keep hearing about, which is much closer to Doklam. And Nathula has also been closed ever since the Doklam crisis broke out. But again, Nakula is a brand new place where we are seeing this kind of a skirmish. Sorry, Mohal, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So also like Sikkim was supposed to be part of the settled boundary, where they
Indeed,
call it
yes.
the international boundary. I mean, the issues are in the northern sector with Ladakh and in the eastern sector with Arunachal Pradesh.
Arunachal,
So
yes.
Sikkim was supposed to be the settled boundary, and now they have opened up another front apparently.
True.
So now coming to the main standoffs which are occurring in Ladakh and are still ongoing. So the first standoff point was the Pangong Tso or the Pangong Lake. Now this beautiful lake in eastern Ladakh is on the LAC with Tibet. Now approximately two-thirds of the lake is under Chinese control, while the remaining one-third is under Indian control. This lake has been, I mean, if listeners recall, has been featured in quite a few Bollywood movies such as Dil Se and Three Idiots, and also in other regional cinema. This is like a popular shooting location. So now coming back to the aspect of the where the disputes are occurring. So the lake's northern bank, as you see, has protrusions which look like fingers into the lake. Now there are 8 protrusions which are identified as fingers to demarcate this disputed territory. So if you see this image that we are sharing courtesy of bharatrakshak.com forum, uh, what India asserts basically is that the line of actual control is up to finger 8. However, the Chinese claim says it starts at finger 2. So if you see, like, finger 2 is to the left of the image and finger 8 is to the right or the east. So this is the area between finger 2 and finger 8 will be the kind of the disputed area between the two nations. Now, to put this in better perspective, the Twitter user Detestra, who does IMINT, which is imagery intelligence, in his recent tweet, as you see on the screen, have shown the respective claim lines, where the Indian claim line is up to uh, finger 8, and uh, the Chinese claim line is up to finger 4. So. Moving on. So now while India claims that the LAC is at finger 8, their patrol used to take up to a place until about finger 5. And anything beyond finger 5 was always challenged by the Chinese. Now, interestingly, during the 1999 Kargil War, when Indian troops were diverted from the area to fight the war, China took advantage of this opportunity and quietly built a road to at Finger Four. Now, Finger Four is where, as per certain reports, the Indian and Chinese troops came to blows in middle of 2017, which resulted in stone pelting. I mean, this was also happening concurrently when the Doklam standoff was occurring in the eastern sector. Now, as per some reports, around 6 years, the Chinese attempted to build a permanent construction at Finger 4, which was then subsequently demolished after Indians strongly objected to it. The Indian side patrols on foot, and before the recent tensions could go up to Finger 8. Now, the fracas between the Indian and Chinese soldiers earlier this month happened in the general area around Finger 5, which led to a disengagement between the two sides. However, after that, the Chinese have now stopped the Indian soldiers moving beyond Finger 2. It is an eyeball to eyeball situation, which is still developing as per reports. Now, India had tried building a road from Finger 2 towards Finger 3, which would then allow soldiers and vehicles to move quickly along the northern bank of the lake. Now, as per reports in the print, the Chinese have built blocking points at Finger 2 to stop Indian patrols from going further, and are also reportedly building bunkers in that area. Now, sources said that the importance of the Finger area to the Chinese is that if they come west of the Finger 4, they will have direct observation of Lukung, which is where the Indian patrol boats are kept, and they will be able to observe all of India's movements around the northern bank. I mean, like Pangong is like one of the main contentions. There are a lot of claims and counterclaims. So all this reporting we have sourced from various sources is still fluid. I mean, every day we keep hearing new reports. So hopefully, once the standoff ends, we will get a final picture of which finger everybody is at and which finger are they moving into. It's like quite confusing to say the least to track all these claims and counterclaims from various sources. But there
So,
is some issue occurring between finger 2 and finger 3 for sure. I mean,
right. So, if that's the case, then we all know that the Chinese have always claimed till finger four. And according to the report in the print, it says that the Chinese have built blocking points at finger two. That kind of implies that the Chinese soldiers had actually trespassed into Indian territory, right? That's the kind of observation
yeah,
that people are
but
making.
then certain sources say so. Like the image that that Teteswa shared, he says the claim is up to finger 4, while other reports say the Chinese claims are up to finger 2. So that also leads an added level of confusion whether the Chinese claim is still finger 2 or finger 4.
Again, goes
So
back to our original complaint that the Chinese have never shared their claim lines with us at all. So we don't really know what goes on in their mind.
yeah, I mean, as you say, it's like a fluid situation, and when the lack of reporting also hurts us in this case. So, anyways, moving to the hot springs area. So, as per the NDTV report on May 29th, sources indicated that the Chinese buildup of forces has taken place close to the Indian post, though it is likely that the buildup is presently located on the Chinese side of the LAC, and there are like no incursions. Now, reports indicated that this month the PLA did move artillery and towed artillery and infantry combat vehicles to areas near the LAC. I think that got a lot of buzz in the media because everybody was speculating, oh, like Chinese are bringing heavy armor and we are like in trouble. But that's not the case, which we'll dwell more later in the podcast. But um, these formations are still like to the east of the LAC in Chinese held territory and are not any new incursions into Indian held territory. So again, if we refer to the Twitter user Detressa, who does like imagery intelligence, in his recent tweet from May 29 confirmed that the Chinese buildup was within Chinese held territory and they did not intrude LAC. So this sort of confirms the NDTV report which was occurring. And I mean, I'm also, you can see it on the screen regarding the images for the same. So
Right,
now coming to the third hand standoff point, which is the Galwan Valley. So the Shyok River is an important landmark if you look in Ladakh, and it runs mostly parallel to the LAC in eastern Ladakh. Now Galwan Valley is a narrow valley which branches off from the Shyok River. So this area, I mean, interestingly, saw armed clashes between Chinese and Indian troops during the 1962 war. Now, at the present day, the Chinese troops have reported to have come very close to the LAC or possibly slightly over the LAC. Now, the construction of a feeder road or bridge, as you see on the screen, over the rivulet near the confluence of the Galwan and the Shayok River. So the Galwan Valley also carries water from the Galwan River. So the confluence has been quoted as the reason for the standoff. So they have been trying to build a small bridge over the rivulet, which will give better access from uh, the main road. So the building of this feeder road, as they say, that branches off from the main 255-kilometer Dabruk Shayak DBO road, or what is commonly referred as DSDBO road, has reportedly urged the Chinese who would like to want this construction to be stopped immediately. Now, as per satellite analysis by Nathan Rooser of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, I mean, as you see in the image, the Chinese posts are beyond the LAC on eastern side of the LAC, which is in Chinese held territory, or one location would be very close, either like slightly over the LAC or on the LAC. Now the Indian position is like still 500 meters away, as it indicated. So uh, again, like there were some reports saying that they had crossed well over, which doesn't seem to be true from based on this reports by imagery intelligence. Okay, so Galwan River Basin is at 13,600 feet, while the surrounding mountain crests are 19,000 feet high, which makes it unlikely for any major conflict escalation in this area. In theory, even if the Chinese were to bring in overwhelming forces to this area, they would be constricted to mostly fighting in this narrow valley, which would not help them even with a large number of troops. So, I mean, I've been sharing these images so you can see like it's a narrow valley, the Galwan Valley with high peaks around. So, I mean, it would be, even if you had overwhelming a superior amount of forces, it would still be hard to do any kind of armed conflict in this where you would be highly successful. So now coming to the Indian response, like what has India done in response to this Chinese standoff with the Chinese troops, I mean. So, I mean, initially there was a lot of sort of like panic, for lack of better term, in the media about it. So, a defense journalist, I mean, I shall not name him, like had over the past few days gradually ratchet up the tension on this so-called Chinese incursions across the LAC. He started up saying, "Oh, there are 5,000 troops." Then he moved on to 10,000 troops. I mean, it was like almost like a binary fission occurring in the number of troops. So these soldiers were said to, then he started like this theory that they were said to have been deep inside Indian territory on our side of the LAC. At some point during the standoff, his claims were that there was a Chinese brigade at each of these face-off points, which was like too good to be true, in Ladakh. Now, while reasons for this alarmist reporting are best known to him, I mean, this was picked up by both the Indian and the foreign media experts who were quoting him, painting a very grim picture of the situation on the ground, which was like not simply true. Now, there were other sources in the media, thankfully, who did quote that there were 5,000 troops who were diverted from an ongoing exercise in Tibet, but they were not at the LAC per se. They were held in reserve at depth in Chinese held territory in Aksai Chin. Now, Rajat Pandit of the Times of India reported that there are only 1,200 to 1,500 soldiers at the actual face-off points, while Snehesh Alex Philip at the print said it was estimated, and I quote, like it is estimated that every transgress location has around 600 to 800 troops each, end quote. So, I mean, if you look at it, it's either like say 1,200 to 1,500, or even if you multiply like 600 into 3, it would still be like, or maybe 800 into 3 is like still 2,400. It's nowhere close to like a brigade each, as the other reporter was alluding to. Now, both of these numbers are well below the alarmist 5,000 to 10,000 troops as mentioned above. Now, India in response had decided to stay dug in and conduct what is called mirror deployment. So what mirror deployment means, like if China deploys some troops, we push our troops up and make sure that we have adequate sun in case the balloon goes up. So now Times of India had report had said that Indian Army had moved some of its units of the Leh-based infantry division forward to their operational alert areas, with other units replacing them in the traditional depth areas. So this was basically to cater for any contingencies just in case. I mean, a very unlikely possibility that hostilities break out at the LAC, which I still personally think is like obviously it's not 0%, but it's like slim. Now, while some folks had uh, I mean, the common folk readily experience like heartburn or have many mini panic attacks over the the crazy reporting that we have seen on the Chinese forces near and in depths around the LAC. Now, most don't consider that the strength of Indian forces in eastern Ladakh. Now, if you look at the screen, like below is an image of Indian forces based in the area based off some brilliant work by Vats Rohit, Twitter handle Kesari Dwaj, who has meticulously outlined in detail all the Indian troops and armor force levels in the critical in this area. So he does mention that as part of the 14 Corps. So interestingly, like up to the 1999 Kargil War, the 15 Corps was in charge of the entire Kashmir area. Now, after the Kargil War, some years after that, they separated. They set up a new 14 Corps, which was just to serve Ladakh. And over the years, I mean, over the past 2 decades, they gradually increase force levels in here with the 14 Corps, where they have 3 infantry divisions and an armored brigade, including some tanks deployed to DB or Daulat Beg Goldi. So, anyways, moving on to I mean, you can read the details on the screen. Now, one must understand that when you're projecting force levels at LAC, one has to also consider strengths on both sides to get a good perspective. I mean, just looking at the Chinese side in a vacuum doesn't help us, because you might just see, oh, there are like thousands of troops, and like it might just make seem to you that there's nothing on the Indian side, which many of the media reporting doesn't allude to, unfortunately. Now, India over the past 10 years has strengthened its presence in the area. Any kind of skirmish in the areas, especially where there are the terrain presents a challenge, will require the aggressor to have a substantial superiority in force levels to achieve these goals. Now, there hasn't been up till now any such reporting of massive buildup of troops where they could simply overwhelm with vastly superior numbers the Indian positions. Um, I mean, even on a highly localized level, such buildup has not been reported. Now, with the Indian forces deployed in numbers, um, as you see in the image, I mean, no Chinese commander in his right frame of mind would even want to escalate this thing to an armed conflict. Now, while some in the media may want to project the events in a manner that the situation is dire and war is imminent, the possibility of an armed skirmish remains like slim. I mean, the situation as it goes best encapsulated by M.K. Narayan, the former national security advisor, and also interestingly, a special representative on the boundary talks under the previous UPA government, who said that, and I quote him, quote, the most important thing is not to view every single border skirmish as the beginning of another war. He said, we should be careful in not being driven by, and I'm sorry to say, what the media and many the people are saying, end quote. So like this was how the Indian response. So now this has brought up several questions in the minds of many, that what's the reason for this current standoff? I mean, like, why, what would be the trigger point for this? Now, the best explanation that people could come up is the infrastructure that has built up over the last few years. Now, China has what we describe as many as having an early movers advantage, as having far better border infrastructure on their side of the boundary. Now, this asymmetry in border infrastructure has helped the Chinese all these years, and they were happy to have that because India was lacking in this regard. Now, India, I mean, this was like a complete head scratcher to me. Like, for a very long time, even after the defeat in 1962 war, tragically neglected to build the necessary robust infrastructure near to the LAC. The thinking back in the day was like reportedly that, oh, if there was a war and if China would overrun the Indian positions at the border, they could use this infrastructure and rapidly advance into this infrastructure will give them and easy access to the Chinese troop to ingress rapidly into India. Thankfully, around like probably like around 1.5 decade ago, this defensive mindset was finally let go, and priority was given to building roads and railway links in these hard to remote areas near the LAC. Now, Indian troops coming to the local area, like what we call Eastern Ladakh or subsector North, as how it's referred. Indian troops were at a disadvantage due to not having ideal road connectivity. Now, India has an advanced landing ground, or ALG as it's referred, for the Indian Air Force in the Daulat Beg Oldie, which is like in the northernmost part of Eastern Ladakh or subsector North. So Daulat Beg Oldie has the world's, interestingly, the highest advanced landing ground. It's almost 17,000 feet above sea level. So supplies in these troops in this area had either to be airlifted to this advanced landing ground or were transported. I mean, imagine in this day and age via mules of all things, which was a arduous few days journey from Leh. So, and also Delot Beg Oldie is just a short distance away from the critical Karakoram Pass, which sits on the border with Tibet. Now, last year, as a part of this massive push, uh, and due to the tremendous work by the BRO, which is the Border Roads Organization, who is responsible for building and maintaining border roads, the strategic 255-kilometer Darbuk Shayok Daulat Beg Oldie or DSDBO road got completed. Now, if you look at the image, like this excellent illustration by again by Vats Rohit or Twitter handle Kesri Dwaj, the Dabruk to Daulat Beg Oldie road is shown, and it shows all the major points which were connected by this road from Leh to Shayok to the confluence of the Shayok and the Galwan rivers to Murgo and to Daulat Beg Oldie and eventually the Karakoram Pass. Now, the Director General of BRO, Lieutenant General Harpal Singh, in an interview just a couple of months ago to Bharat Shakti, had said that the DSDBO road had approximately 37 bridges, which have been built across various rivers and rivulets. Now, this road has cut down the time to reach DBO from Leh from 2 to 3 days to just under 6 hours. So, imagine the improvement in the connectivity. Now, this has been a great achievement as during the summer, the raging waters of the Shayak River made it impossible to cross, hindering connectivity with areas across the river to the LAC. Also, there were frequent cloudbursts, as he mentioned, and also melting glaciers, which proved a lot of challenges to move across this axis, which was vital to connect to the Daulat Beg Oldie up in the north of this region. Now, one of the standoff points, as I mentioned earlier, was the junction of the Galwan and the Shayak rivers. Was caused by the construction of this feeder road, which branches of this strategic 255-kilometer road. Interestingly, like Taylor Fravel, of the professor of political science and director of security studies program at MIT, said in an interview that China lacks, and I quote him, China lacks a road similar to DSDBO that runs parallel to the LAC, and that can facilitate the lateral movement of troops along the Chinese side of the LAC. China likely views it as challenging to their position and on and perhaps the stability of the LAC, end quote. So, to conclude here, like the Chinese have enjoyed dominance in this infrastructure on the domain in the past, and now are slowly waking up to the fact that the gap with India is slowly decreasing. Now, it is not that the infrastructure poses an existential threat to their positions across the LAC, but once their one-sided advantage of theirs is now slowly being eroded, is what rankles them the most. Their aim as part of the standoff is up the pressure in India to show that they can still call the shots and change the situation on the ground as they desire. To show basically, like Kishore, they are the boss.
Hmm.
Now, the Chinese would want to return to an old status quo as a precondition to peacefully disengage from the standoffs. So basically, they say, oh, you know what? We built our roads. Now we will come and intervene. And now, if you want us to go back quietly, you stop building your roads, which would be such a total bullying attempt on their part, I would say. Now, this would be a sort of a reverse of the Decollum situation where India blocked Chinese construction of a road towards a sensitive Jamperi region in Bhutan. Now, during that standoff in 2017, near the tri-junction of India, Tibet and Bhutan, the Indian troops crossed over into Bhutanese territory and stayed there during the 73-day standoff. Now, such a return to status quo would mean abandoning the infrastructure building on India's part. I mean, this would obviously be detrimental to India's interests, as this would leave Chinese in a stronger position at the LAC vis-a-vis India. Now, India so far, and I hope should continue to do so in the future, resist any such bullying attempts by the Chinese to abandon building of roads as part of any bargain with the Chinese to not do incursions in the Indian territory across the LAC. I mean, Chinese, as you know, are not to be trusted at any time. They can easily change their position at a drop of an hat. Now, if India can successfully navigate such standoffs without giving up this building of this critical infrastructure, then the Chinese plan to retain their first mover advantage will not succeed. And I think, Kishore, I think the statements from the Ministry of Defense, and I think even I think even I don't know if Rajnath Singh alluded to this, that basically the infrastructure building is not going to be slowed down. Correct?
Indeed, yeah, that's what they have mentioned
So at least we
categorically.
are saying like, I mean, I'm using somebody else's term, like saying like resolute at the border and firm, and saying we'll negotiate with you, but we won't like stop the road building as a precondition to you guys. I mean, the Chinese disengaging from the border.
Correct. Basically, what they are telling is they want to stay firm at the border and be negotiating, and have a flexible approach at the discussion table.
Yeah. So now, like this brings a question that is this standoff different from the other standoffs? How is it different? So while the standoffs have occurred with China in the past, especially the recent past, now what makes this different versus earlier ones? There are like few, I wouldn't say couple, a few different points. How it's different this time around versus earlier ones. So see, earlier standoffs like Depsang in 2013, Chumar in 2014, Doklam in 2017 were in a single point or location. Now, this time around, we have three distinct standoffs occurring on the same time in Ladakh, which are like, I mean, mind you, geographically well separated. It's not like they're occurring in like the same general area. There's also an incident in Sikkim in the eastern sector, which was like thousands of kilometers away from these standoffs in Ladakh. This, as per some experts, is a sign that this was not due to some actions of which can be attributed to some overzealous local commander, local PLA commander, I mean. Now, it could very well be that the PLA is possibly acting under instructions from the highest levels in Beijing to stir up trouble at the border. Now, another point is that in the past, these incidents have largely remained peaceful, barring the 2007 incident and the banks of the Pangon Lake, where a few soldiers from both sides were injured in stone pelting. Now, this time, however, the number of injuries to soldiers is like concerning. The aggressive Chinese behavior has resulted in fisticuffs and fighting, which has led to injuries, which, as per some reports, has even necessitated the moving of some injured soldiers from the heights in Ladakh down to hospitals across North India for treatment, which is something new we haven't heard before. The number of soldiers like might not have been in thousands as some defense journalists have alluded to, but like they still seem to be larger than the previous standoffs. I mean, the reports of China moving up close to the border, but obviously like not at the LAC, but at some depth from the LAC, of tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery, seems that they have came prepared for this standoff. I think, Kishore, what I feel is that they probably have learned from the earlier standoffs where they encountered vigorous Indian response, and maybe they just want to do this show of force. So maybe they brought in the heavy armor to maybe scare the Indians.
Indeed, I think it's more of a perspective
Plus,
and some kind of a
yeah.
show of strength,
Mhm.
just to catch Indian armed forces off guard. But I think,
Yeah, yeah. I think they
yeah.
have learned from the previous standoff. It looks like a little bit.
Mm, mm,
Yeah. So interestingly, Lieutenant General D.S. Huda in an interview with Nitin Gokhale on Strat News Global, said that the 2014 Chumar incident coincided with Xi's visit to India, which I mean everybody knows like very well that it was occurring then. But uh, this was also when there was a lot of flooding in Kashmir. So as per what he was mentioning, moving of troops in Kashmir was more difficult. So this leads to speculation on his part that this time around maybe the Chinese are trying to get advantage of India like they did back then when we had flooding issues. Maybe now we are busy with dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. So they are trying to take maybe advantage to see maybe we can be moved off our positions by intervening now versus of all any other time, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Kishore?
Yeah, I think you gave a very good explanation of the eventual happenings on the ground, wherein we kind of understood the topography and the claims and also the kind of skirmishes that we have had, each one being different from the other. The Galwan Valley skirmish is different from
Yeah.
Pangong so skirmish for various reasons. And
I think they covered the whole gamut, right? They have intervened in a
the
valley. They
valley,
have come on a
water.
lake,
Mm.
lake, and like on a flat. I mean, not I mean exactly a flat plain, but relatively flat ground considering what else is there in Ladakh. So and that too, like it like Galwan is slightly to the north. I mean, uh, Hot Spring is slightly to the middle. I wouldn't say like
And
central
then
Ladakh.
Pangong to the south.
Pangon is
Yes,
like to the south. I mean, it's not truly south. There's still like Demchok and Chumar below it.
correct,
But yeah,
correct.
I mean, they have covered like probably like three different axes into,
Mm.
um, uh, I mean, Ladakh. And interesting, like Galwan, one thing I forgot to mention is like Galwan, then these points, one thing I wanted to mention is this. I mean, we know like some uh, well-known places where they are not agreeing to the border, like the Pangong Lake is well-known, but Galwan is like a new front that of they're kind of opened up, like which was never a kind of issue. I mean, the interesting thing is they never exchange the map, so we don't know what the perception is, but we never had issues at Galwan, which is kind of different from the previous standoffs.
I mean, this only goes to show that the Chinese were never honest in their attempts of border negotiations. I mean, 5 years down the line, with such repeated skirmishes, 5 years down the line, they can come with a new claim, telling that
Yeah.
they have always claimed Galwan Valley and the Galwan River confluence point with the Shiok River. I mean, there's no way that you can argue back at them telling, hey, you know what? 5 years back when we asked you, you never gave us your claim, but
Yeah.
now you are doing that.
Yeah, I think that's why patrolling up to your claim lines is important.
Exactly.
Uh,
Yes.
because if you don't patrol up to it, they'll say, "Oh, you never bother to patrol up to it. So why are you making the claim?" You know now.
In fact, the Chinese have gotten good at it. They keep doing it in the South China Sea, where they have claims contrasting that with the Philippines and Vietnam. So they keep
Mhm.
altering the facts on the ground and also try to back up with some biased maps or biased reports from centuries earlier. And that is how they kind of strengthen their
Mhm.
position. So I think it's a similar strategy that they are planning out here as well in the western sector in Ladakh, and you never know if they want to do something similar in Sikkim as well. But we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Kishore,
So
what do you?
yeah. So until now we looked at the actual skirmishes and the more of the tactical happenings around in Ladakh. But we also need to look at the larger geopolitical aspect of all this, especially from a 30,000 feet level, since both India and China have always been at loggerheads when it comes to the line of control, line of actual control. So let us look at the strategic response of India and figure out how India has reacted. So, during the 2017 Doklam crisis, while the United States made a reference to the crisis in favor of India, there was hardly any reaction from the rest of the world, most probably fearing the Chinese backlash. As former Foreign Secretary and National Security Advisor Shiv Shankar Menon wrote in a paper for Brookings, that no other country shares India's precise set of interests for the simple reason that no other country shares India's history, geography, size, culture, and identity. There is no point in India getting dragged into external engagements where it would have to make a stand if it was part of a military alliance like NATO with USA or other powers. The more India rises, the more it must expect Chinese opposition, and it will have to also work with other powers to ensure that its interests are protected in the neighborhood, the region, and also in the world. The balance will keep shifting between cooperation and competition with China, both of which characterize that relationship. Now, Mohal, one funny thing that I read while researching was that somebody of repute, I wouldn't want to name him, actually went ahead and suggested that India would have to attack China in the South China Sea as a revenge for all this. So just like how I mentioned, India should not get dragged into all these external entanglements where their forces run thin and they have no way of supplementing their own armed forces strength and end up looking weaker and having their nose bloodied unnecessarily. So I think India should just focus and concentrate on what they want and how they want to achieve it rather than opening up new fronts when they can hardly support that and strengthen that. Also, again, the important thing is that there is a need to rapidly accumulate usable and effective power, even while the microbalance will take time to right itself. In 2017, there was almost daily coverage on Doklam in what was a campaign by state-controlled media in China to whip up the public sentiment. Mohal, you would be aware of all this. So every day we would get up to see
Yeah.
brand new claims and brand new threatening articles and
Yeah.
op-eds coming in from the state media and also
Yeah.
from uh, the the global channel news as well.
I
So
think we are getting a reminder of the 62 hour as if we had amnesia and we Indians forgot the 62
I
hour. Every
forgot.
day they would remind.
Yeah, I mean, we just had to remind them that we are elephants and we have elephantine memory.
I mean, also I remember they also did make one of those channels, racist video making fun of Indians. It was like getting nasty in the end.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. So China's government and media have maintained a studied public silence on the developments through much of the past 2-3 weeks. Again, in a marked contrast to the daily public messaging that we saw during the Doklam standoff. As of May 26, there has been little coverage on the border in Chinese media. Again, another contrast from 2017. Now, that approach of whipping up the public sentiment has largely been absent so far. The silence from both New Delhi and Beijing has been seen by observers as suggesting a desire to keep space for de-escalation. And what happens generally is if both the fighting parties keep moving closer and closer to the cliff, to the edge of the cliff, then it becomes extremely difficult to walk back to a point of safety. And I think it's very prudent that both of them have a desire to keep space for de-escalation and also ensuring that there is some kind of a chance and hope that the longer the standoff continues, we will have more and more chances for de-escalation. Now, in 2017, the Chinese analysts had described the Doklam standoff as being qualitatively different from other India-China border situations, as it was not taking place on territory disputed between the two countries. In fact, China was emphasizing in statements then that India had crossed across the border into Bhutan on land that is disputed between Bhutan and China and to which India had no claim. So basically, the Chinese were telling that India should mind its own business and should walk back. Now, coming back to the current day scenario, we will need some demarcation to be done across all these lines. Otherwise, just empty, barren lands, and we'll have no idea of each other's claims, and we'll have such skirmishes and also armed clashes, a possibility of armed clashes happening, and things spiraling out of control as well happening in the future. If you remember, Modi in 2014 had said, I quote him, clarification of line of actual control would greatly contribute to our efforts to maintain peace and tranquility, and requested President Xi to resume the stalled process of clarifying the line of actual control. We should also seek an early settlement of the boundary question, unquote. Now, from Beijing's standpoint, Indian action has been a clear violation of China's sovereignty, even if the area was also claimed by Bhutan, with whom India has a special kind of relationship, more like a protectorate. Hence, China's diplomacy was vocal and public, designed to communicate its resolve to defend what it views as its territory in the Doklam Bowl. When Indian troops returned across the border to Indian territory, the situation eased and was eventually resolved. Today, however, China appears to be asserting itself along the line of actual control in the Western sector. This is similar to the 2013 and 2014 border standoffs between China and India. Perhaps paradoxically, fewer and lesser vocal or public statements allow China to use troop movements and posture to signal its opposition to Indian activities on the LAC, while leaving flexibility for a resolution that would likely entail Chinese troops returning to their original positions. By contrast, in Doklam, China very publicly tied its hands in a way that it is not doing today, at least so far. Now, again, Mohal, you spoke about this particular interview of D.S. Huda, Lieutenant General D.S. Huda, and China watcher Jaidev Ranade with Nitin Gokhale on Stratnews Global. Now, again, in that same interview, Jaidev Ranade said that after statements in August 19, post the Article 370 being abrogated, the Chinese feel that their strategic and economic interests in POK are threatened. He also says that China views Modi government policy as being more muscular. He further adds that Chinese believe that everyone is occupied with COVID-19, so they can take advantage of this situation. This, he believes, shows in their actions where they are where they are trying to up the ante not only across the line of actual control, but also on other fronts such as Hong Kong, Taiwan, and South China Sea. The Chinese mistakenly think that India will back down when threatened by looking for some way out. Lieutenant General D.S. Huda pointed out that this can't be emphasized enough. Chinese military pressure on India has not worked in a very, very long time. Be it the 1967 Nathula clashes or the 1986 Sumdorong-Chu standoff, 2013 Depsang, 2014 Chumir, or 2017 Doklam. He further adds, saying that where has military pressure on India worked for Chinese giving very big dividends? On the idea of India putting the pressure back on China, he says that there are points across the LAC and international boundary where it can be done. He is not in favor of upping the ante on China via maritime domain by sailing in the South China Sea, which is something that even I agree with. I already made that point. So yeah, so this is kind of the strategic response coming in from India. Mohal, you want to talk about the Chinese diplomatic response for all this?
Yeah, so on May 19th, I mean, this was like quite some time ago, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing said that India had crossed the LAC in the western section and Sikkim to enter what they say to enter Chinese territory. It also accused India of blocking normal patrols and attempting to unilaterally change the status quo, which is, I mean, kind of hilarious because it's exactly the opposite of what uh, we have been reporting. Now, another statement on May 22nd said that with the border never being demarcated, problems occurred on occasion. It said that China opposed infringements across the border and diplomatic channels were open, and it is believed that the issue could be properly resolved through negotiation. The English language Global Times on May 18th published the only article so far on the border situation, saying that Chinese troops have bolstered border control measures and have made necessary moves in response to India's recent illegal construction of defense facilities across the border into Chinese territory in the Galwan region. End quote. It cited a quote like a source to the Chinese military. Uh, a Chinese version of the article published on Sina website's military portal referred to Galwan Valley as China's territory, although this was missing in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs statements.
So the Global Times is actually asking for more, while the MFA is just making claims. Global Times is actually making far more exorbitant claims.
But I mean, it's just like a state mouthpiece, so you can never know the distinction, right? I mean, you could be playing a bad cop, good cop
Oh,
situation.
indeed, yeah. So the next time around, when they actually sit across the table, they might actually come up with the Global Times version and tell, you know what, we actually claim all this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the CGTN China on Wednesday, I mean, like this is like not this Wednesday, but earlier, reiterated its stance that on the border issues with India is consistent and clear, and stressing that's the situation in the China-India border area is overall stable and controllable. Now, Zhao Lijian, like spokesperson for the Chinese Foreign Ministry, made the remarks when asked whether China had sent an additional 5,000 troops to the line of actual control with India. Zhao said the situation with the border with India is overall stable and controllable, underscoring that the two countries have proper mechanisms and communication channels to resolve the issues made through a dialogue and consultation. Uh, he said like that we are capable of resolving the issues properly through dialogue and consultation. Zhao stated while stressing that China remains committed to safeguarding its territorial sovereignty and security and safeguarding peace and stability in the border areas. Now, China, he said like China and India are fighting the COVID. Actually, sorry, the Chinese envoy to India, Sun Weidong, he said that China and India are fighting together against COVID-19, and we have an important task to consolidate relations. Our youth should realize the relation between China and India. The two countries are opportunities for each other and pose no threat. End quote. I mean, just literally saying no threat at the end was kind of hilarious in my opinion. On Sunday, the Chinese Foreign Minister Yang Yi did not even mention India once during his long annual conference in Beijing. With the Chinese National People's Congress, it started like last Friday. There is an unlikely to be any meaningful dialogue between the two sides until this ends, I feel. I mean, the Chinese Foreign Ministry did speak for a record 100 minutes, but there was no mention of India. I mean, as our former PM Atal Bihari Vajpayee sagely had observed, like you can change your friends but not neighbors. I think this observation still holds true.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Okay, so let's look at the Indian diplomatic stand, which we have not looked at so far. The proof of the pudding actually lies in the eating. So it needs to be seen if the PLA will ask its soldiers to return back from their forward positions. This will be the actual step which confirms the diffusion of tensions. India cannot and should not be satisfied with the statement coming in from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. After all, even the Dokla crisis spread out for 73 days. These LAC incursions are less than a month old as we record this episode. The Chinese might want to drag this issue for a while longer to test our military and political resolve. Both sides are aware that they cannot and don't need a full scale war at this moment. However, with an unmarked boundary, it becomes imperative for both sides to keep making periodic claims. Else, when the actual time comes to sit down at the table and discuss, the lack of periodic claims might ruin the case. Hence, both countries in general and China specifically would want to create favorable facts on the ground and also attempt to remove unfavorable facts on the ground. After all, This was the strategy adopted by China in its claims in the South China Sea, and India will be wary of such tactics and would not wish to be seen as bowing down to pressure. The current agreements to manage the border don't seem to be working when they were drawn up years ago. A new modus vivendi will have to be reached, otherwise these events will keep on happening. How best to tackle such situations going forward without compromising India's interests in face of Chinese pressure and bullying is an open question. With the likelihood of such incidents, including physical fighting between troops, more likely to occur, there remains a danger of actual shots being fired by some crazy soldier when he is under the pump during such standoffs. This can easily devolve into a 1967 Nathula type incident. Back in 67, we did not have social media and 24/7 news media, which would create intense pressure on both sides to not back down, making any kind of diplomatic de-escalation difficult to execute. In Modi 2.0, former Foreign Secretary and Indian Ambassador to China, Subramaniam Jaishankar, was made the Minister for External Affairs, primarily because of his experience in dealing with the Chinese. In September last year, when he was on a whirlwind tour around the world to justify India's step to repeal autonomy of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, he had said during his address to the Council on Foreign Relations (CFR), I quote him, "Where we differ with China, we have mechanisms, and in a way, a sort of ethos of handling it. And frankly, it's not a relationship that has given cause for anxiety to the world for many, many years." Unquote. During the Chennai Connect informal summit between Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping at Mamallapuram on the outskirts of Chennai in October 2019, both the leaders had vowed to maintain peace and tranquility in the border areas. Now is the time to come good on that vow for China's political and military leadership. Although China would never say this publicly, there is an assessment in India that China feels that India's push to build physical infrastructure can one day threaten the Lhasa-Kashgar highway in Aksai Chin. Remember, both Tibet and Xinjiang are restive provinces in the far west of China. From a strategic perspective, this is kind of similar to how India thinks that China has a stranglehold on India's northeast as it has the ability to control the chicken's neck. The only difference is that once the chicken's neck is captured, the only way India's northeast can be contacted by the mainland is by air. However, such a complication does not arise in case of Lhasa-Kashgar highway. Also, China might still feel irritated by the presence of Indian infrastructure this close to their highway. What has alarmed analysts and policymakers in India this time around is the fact that Chinese incursions happened at multiple places across the LOC at once in a synchronized fashion. Added to this were the aggressive stance taken by the Nepali government at the behest of the Chinese, and also the incident of sinking of a Vietnamese fishing boat in the South China Sea near the Paracel Islands in early April. India, on the other hand, is left with no option but to stare back at the Chinese across the LAC and make it obvious to them that the Indian military and the political establishment won't back down. Else, the government runs the risk of being seen as capitulating in front of an emboldened Xi Jinping, who is desperate to whip up nationalistic sentiments as the domestic situation was nothing to talk about for the party and Jinping. Okay, so let's just quickly talk about the US President Donald Trump's offer to mediate. Amidst all these developments came a sudden and unexpected offer from the US President Donald Trump that he was ready, willing, and able to mediate between India and China when asked. India has always held the view that border disputes are to be resolved using bilateral means between the two nations. Not surprising at all that India's MEA spokesperson Anurag Srivastava said that the two sides have established mechanisms both at military and diplomatic levels to resolve situations that may arise in border areas peacefully through dialogue and continue to remain engaged through these channels. China too declined the offer from the US. Zhao Lijian, spokesman of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, said, I quote him, both parties have the ability to properly resolve problems between the two countries through dialogue and consultation. No third party intervention is required. Unquote. Mohal?
Yeah, so I mean, it was kind of hilarious that for the Chinese, it would really rankle them that, uh, like, for them, India is a weak, inferior power, and to be put on the same pedestal as India. I mean, when Trump comments about intervening in or helping India and Pakistan talk together, it rankles Indians. The same situation would have been in Beijing when the comment was made.
I mean, it sounds very hypocritical in another sense as well. Trump wants to punish China when it comes to many other issues like trade or Hong Kong or South China Sea, but when it comes to the LAC, he wants to offer his own services to mediate. So again, some kind of a hypocrisy there.
Yeah. So, Kishore, do you want to take the end the show for us?
Yes, I think we've covered quite a bit of ground, and people would now have a fair idea of how things stand. Before we wind this episode up, let's switch our focus to recommendations. Mohal, you want to share anything that you read which is worth recommending to our listeners?
Yeah, I would recommend the the show. I mean, the interview that Nitin Gokhale on Strat News Global did with Jayadev Ranade and
Dear Suda.
Lieutenant General now retired DS Huda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a fascinating interview where you kind of get to know the Indian perspective. Yeah, and again, my recommendation for the week, I have already recommended this book earlier, but I would want to recommend it again. Is the book called Choices Inside the Making of Indian Foreign Policy by Shiv Shankar Menon. He kind of talks about all the various choices that India had to make when it comes to various foreign policy challenges that it had to face. Okay, so with that, we come to the end of this week's episode where we covered in detail the multiple skirmishes witnessed across the LAC between China and India. To continue hearing about such interesting topics, do subscribe to our channel India Rising wherever you are listening to us. If you have not left us a review, we urge you to do so as it helps other listeners like you in finding us. We will be covering the larger global geopolitical ramifications of the COVID 19 pandemic in one of our future episodes, as we believe that there are developments still happening and it's too early right now to come up with our analysis. We would also like to hear from you if you have any suggestions on any topics that you would like us to cover. Do remember that these topics should be directly related to Indian foreign policy. Until the next time, this is Mohal and Kishore signing off.